I was at the White House recently. I toured the White House for the channel here, and I was in the East Room, and I was looking at some notable events that happened in the East Room, and one of them was Nixon's farewell address to his staff after he resigned the presidency. And you were
Yes,
there. You were
yes.
in that room. What was that like? What was the scene in that room? How was Nixon's demeanor?
Well, it was surreal. It was surreal. He'd announced in a nationwide address the night before that he would resign at noon the next day. So the East Room has got all these chairs and huge media at the back. And I came in a little late, and the chairs were all taken, and I wouldn't have sat anyway because I was somewhat keyed up. So I was standing, and he came in, and there's a standing ovation because the president has entered the room. And he brings his family up to the stage. And I thought, wow, this is really cruel. He's demanded the family be there with him so he's not facing it alone. And then he gives a very personable speech. This is the first time he's ever been seen with glasses in public. And it's right from the heart. And he ends with this idea that you can't hate your enemies, because if you hate them, they win, and you'll ruin yourself. And I thought, what pablum, who wrote this for him? And then it turns out I'm completely wrong. Now, remember, I'm part of the legal team that drove him from office because of misunderstanding of the smoking gun.
Right.
And it turns out his family demanded to be there, and they didn't want him to resign anyway. And then it turns out he's really speaking from the heart. He's really he came from nowhere. He's a simple family. He believes in truth, justice, and the American way. And I'm leaving. Your president, I'm leaving, but you have to stay. And you've got to do your job without hatred or revenge. And he goes out and he gets on the helicopter, gives that sign,
Yep.
a last act of defiance,
Hmm.
and takes off. We gather back 15 minutes later or so in the East Room to see Jerry Ford sworn in,
Wow.
as the subsequent president. And he says the long national nightmare of Watergate is over. And we go about deciding what to do with our lives. Now, we had a litigation staff under James St. Clair, who was the court lawyer, and we had the inside staff under Fred Buzhardt, and I was Fred's deputy. But I had interviewed and hired all of St. Clair's staff. So about a day and a half after Nixon's gone, I called up my friend Larry Silberman, Deputy Attorney General, and I said, Larry, we got to get these lawyers out of here before the press discovers Nixon's defense team is still reporting for work in the EOB.
Yeah.
And he says, let me call you back. And he calls back later that afternoon. He says, we have space at the Department of Justice. We have just finished rehabilitating, but not assigned to another unit. So we can house these people, have them come over tomorrow morning. And he meets with them. And he says, look, you acted honorably. You did not do anything wrong. So sit here and think about the rest of your life. And if you want to do something in government, come see me and I'll write your recommendation if you want to stick around. And if you want to go apply for jobs elsewhere, I'll be your main character reference, which was really, really noble of him to do. Then I went down to see Jim St. Clair, who was going back to Boston, and he was not happy. He left almost within the next day or two. And he said, it's no wonder the wheels kept coming off, because we were defending an indefensible series of actions. Very bitter. Now, he thought he was going to become Nixon's next attorney general. Nixon had discussed it with him. I didn't know that, but I learned that later. And then I just smoothly transitioned back into associate director of general government. I was gonna be named deputy counsel with a formal appointment. And Buzhardt said at one point, Geoff, the way this is going, you might be smarter to stay on your current payroll.
Yeah.
So I just evolved back in, reporting for duty. And upon reflection, Buzhardt never wrote a single memo to me or about me. My name never came up, even though I had been his deputy all along.
Yeah.
Transcribed the tapes, ran the document rooms, briefed the presidential counselors. I was right smack in the middle of it.
Yeah, you got, I mean, I must say, quite lucky. You were able to just carry on with your life, which a lot of your colleagues were not. But are there any possible alternatives that could have played out in which Nixon wouldn't have resigned? I mean, what if he didn't resign?
Well, at the time he resigned, he'd lost the capacity to govern. His uh, uh, impeachment by the House was a foregone conclusion. The Republicans couldn't find enough votes in the Senate to prevent a conviction. So he would have been convicted. Now,
Hmm.
the Senate has never convicted any president. It's a historic fact. 5 impeachments, never a conviction.
Hmm.
But the odds are against it. There are about 1,000 exits of what might have happened.
Yeah, you could play what if all day.
I knew Gordon Liddy from Treasury. I thought he was a madman then. I violently opposed his being hired onto the White House staff. Remember, I'm a very junior guy,
Yeah.
and I lost that battle. Maybe if I'd tried a little bit harder and Gordon had never been hired, sent over someplace else to the Department of Justice or something like that. Um, Maybe if Bud Krogh hadn't decided to do the plumbers break in themselves, maybe if they'd convinced the FBI to go do it, maybe it would have been successful.
Yeah.
Maybe if the Cuban who was supposed to pick the lock had been able to pick the lock so they didn't break in and leave a police
Yeah.
record. Uh, Maybe if John Dean
Yeah.
hadn't been assigned the campaign intelligence plan.
I think maybe if anyone would have spoken up about the smoking gun tape and the truth about it, because there were a small handful of guys that did know what Nixon meant with the smoking gun.
Only one, John Dean.
If he would have spoken up, I guess
John
that's an
John
avenue.
had no interest whatsoever in speaking up,
Yeah.
my friend.
Yeah, but
Let
yeah,
me
that wasn't
let
going to
me
happen.
read something to you because you're a nice guy. Happens to be right here on my desk. I got this 2 weeks ago. This is a news article from the Fort Myers News Press, a newspaper maybe near you, dated Sunday, November 7th, 1976. Okay? This is the week after Jerry Ford has lost the election for president. And there's an interview going on of John Dean. And it's a long interview, but this is the relevant part. The reporter says, do you suppose any modern president is truly innocent of impeachable offenses? And Dean says, I have no personal knowledge of any prior president committing an act. I suspect there has been lying, but not under oath. It's kind of curious to analyze Nixon's offenses. He's not chargeable for the crime of conspiracy to obstruct justice. But when did he enter the conspiracy? As early as June 20th, when the 18-minute gap occurred, or on June 23rd, when he instructed Haldeman to have the CIA call the FBI and shut off the investigation of Mexican money, the so-called smoking gun tape. Well, I don't happen to think that was the smoking gun of Watergate, despite what the press said. Knowing the facts as I do, I doubt the June 23rd tape would be considered obstruction of justice in court. Why not? The reporter asks. The president was trying to block an investigation into potentially illegal campaign contributions, not the Watergate investigation itself. I'd been told earlier by the head of the criminal division that the FBI investigation was restricted to the break-in alone. Haldeman reported that to the president. So if you consider the limits of the FBI inquiry and what Nixon was blocking, this is that FBI investigation, his actions on June 23rd don't fit into the obstruction of justice category. The smoking gun was only firing blanks. And then the reporter says, I've never heard that interpretation before. And Dean says, well, I'm sure you haven't. It's the first time I mentioned it.
And no one thought it would have been important to look into that?
To say the least. But this obscure, maybe it was a weekly, I don't know. And it just surfaced to me 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
And Dean has said, he said in the deposition in the case, Dean versus St. Martin's Press, he said, that the tape has always been misunderstood. And he says, I've always maintained that. And this is proof he had. Now, he will sit, even today, he will sit at a table where somebody says the smoking gun proves Nixon cheated, and he won't correct them. Okay? He'll just stand silent. Now, we have this phrase today, silence is violence. Well, that's what he's doing. I went back and I looked up the court transcript because they're cross-examining John Dean over this smoking gun tape. It's suddenly become the centerpiece of their case against Nixon and Haldeman and Ehrlichman. And Haldeman's attorney, John Wilson, Haldeman knows damn well it was politically to protect the Democrat money because he was the one, Dean told, he was the one meeting with the president. Mm-hmm. And so his lawyer is cross-examining John Dean and saying, wasn't this political? And instead of saying what he said in what I just read you, Dean says, well, they were worried about Gordon Liddy's involvement. Now, that's true. But when you get sworn as a witness, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God. John Dean violated that oath, told partial truth. Yeah. But of course, he gets away with it. He always gets away with it. Nobody knows. But I got to tell you, that news article is fascinating.
Uh-huh. That even way back when he was saying that. But, I mean, to say it lightly, he seems like a slimy individual in all of this. But
he is, the FBI called him the master manipulator. Conrad Black, in his biography, calls him the most slippery of the Watergate characters. I prefer the phrase arch villain.
Yeah, I think those are all accurate.
He is at the very center. He and Gordon Liddy, the very center of the wrongdoing. Gordon does 6 years. John Dean walks free.
Yeah, that's amazing to me how Dean walked free. But let's look to the future. How should we view Watergate in hindsight going forward into the future? What lessons can we take away as the American public from Watergate moving forward?
I think there are 3 things. You put your finger on it earlier. It's the pursuit of truth. Now, truth is bandied about. In the fireplace at Whittier College over the administration building, they have a quote from John Greenleaf Whittier. And it is, early hath life's mighty question, thrilled within thy heart of youth, which with a deep and strong beseeching, what and where is truth? And then you go to Harvard, and every symbol they have is veritas. It's Latin for truth, because it's Harvard. But it's on the symbol of every single one of their schools. And there's an implication, which is disowned by some today, that there is an absolute truth. Our effort is to strive to uncover it. But truth is not malleable. Truth is not occasionally used. So the pursuit of truth is hugely important in politics, in life, in everything we do.
100%.
Second, what is absolutely key to our future is a vibrant and independent press. We didn't have it then. You're closer to it today. It's divided. But even back in colonial times, the press was divided. But you have a fair shot today about reading more about some particular issue, particularly if you go to several different sources. We didn't have alternate views. We didn't have podcasts. We didn't have talk radio. We didn't have Fox News or Newsmax or America Online. We didn't have dissent or the ability to communicate on the internet like we do today. Now, it's possible there's too much information. It's possible it's so chaotic you can't sort it out. But if you're willing to put the effort in, we're going to see if a candidate can be invented out of nowhere and a previous documented record can be dismissed as unimportant because we'll tell you what we think after we get into office. We're reminded of Nancy Pelosi's comment on Obamacare. We got to pass the law to learn what's in it. Well, we're talking about a candidate. We got to elect
the president of the United States.
We're joyful. I don't think it'll stand, but you've got not just political people supporting that, but you've got members of the press up and down the line towing that because they want so desperately to keep somebody else out of power.
Yeah.
This is one of those unique elections where most people will be voting against one candidate or the other, not in favor.